Greetings and salutations, everyone. We are back. Woodworking is Bullshit is back with greetings and salutations and a hot button episode that everyone apparently wants to talk about because we were inundated with responses on this show on perfectionism. I'm your host, Paul Jasper, scientist by day, woodworker by night, and I'm joined by Eric Curtis, fine furniture creator and fine content maker. And Kodamari Designs.
Mary. Fine.
Well, he's a fine boy.
Fine guy.
Hey, thanks. And I'm joined by Mary Sai, fine contemporary furniture maker by night, and the finest UX designer by day.
The finest.
This side of the Mississippi.
All right. Well, today's episode is a barn burner. We asked on several platforms, on Patreon, on Instagram, that we are going to do or tackle the topic of perfectionism. And our inboxes were flooded with questions and responses. So right off the jump, as Eric likes to say, we knew that this was a really important topic that everyone thinks about and or struggles with. So the question is, actually, I didn't really think about the question up front, but I'm just going to make it up right now. Is perfectionism toxic to your creative process?
Ooh.
Or is it potentially a help?
That's good. Right off the jump, too. That's good.
Thank you. So, in every episode, Mary likes to get her panties in a twist over the definition of things. So let's start by a definition of perfectionism by Frost, Martin, Lahart, and Rosenblatt from 1990, Mary.
I don't know who any one of those fuckers are. So
what?
Who defined perfectionism as, quote unquote, setting excessively high standards of self-expression accompanied by excessively critical self-evaluation.
Interesting. Okay.
What, now,
I like one part about that definition because
right.
it means that you set the bar as opposed to there just being a standard bar. Okay.
Yes.
Can I ask what their background was? Like, are they psychologists? Are they economists? What's the situation?
They're psychologists, but in the review article that I took this particular definition from, they gave 10 other definitions by 10 other groups of psychologists. So I really had to just...
Like my wet dream here. So many definitions.
Mary, this is a children's show.
I love all the definitions.
You did not just say that.
She did, man. Listen, this is the truth. She got her panties in a bunch, and it's a wet dream.
Okay. Oh. So it's clear that one of the problems. Oh boy, one of the problems in researching perfectionism has been the inability to concretely define it because there's 20 million definitions. Okay, so much of this. Much of the perfectionism they think in the research literature relates to a somewhat misguided idea about one's ideal self. Like, who are you ideally? As if you have this idea in your head of really who you should be versus who you are. And they say misguided, right? Because it's far higher apparently than you are. And it often can have profound effects on one's mental health. And that has been borne out in the literature and in life time and time again.
How weird would it be though if you met someone and they're like, "I am perfect."
Those people exist. They're called narcissists. That's how the world works.
Their name is Eric Curtis. Yeah,
I love it. It's fine. I won't not admit it. But the thing that immediately jumps out to me, and I don't know if they are showing their hand or if they are attempting to be well-rounded in their definition, but you said two things that showed that these people were assuming perfectionism to have a negative component to it, right? The excessively high standards, and the second thing you said about
excessively critical,
yes,
self-evaluation,
self-critical, and I think from my perspective, if I were to attempt to go full Mary and define perfectionism, I think I would simply say that it is the seeking of perfection. Like, it is the attempt to be perfect.
Use the word in the definition.
The seeking of better than, right? Like, how are we going to define perfect? Like, what are we doing here? The point is this. The point is not to put a positive and a negative in the definition. The point is the seeking. Well, like, what are we going to do? We're going to sit out here and be like, perfectionism is when one attempts to, like, seek godliness, but also it's a bad thing.
I was gonna say, like, striving for, like, flawlessness or something.
All right, flawlessness is a different word for perfection. Like, you can't.
Oh,
So
Mary,
do not use the word in the definition.
Mary, I'm on
You can't define blue as the color of the sky. Like, that's not.
It's a mixture of yellow and green.
What?
Sorry.
All right, enough.
Sorry?
Enough.
Did you hold on? No. We got to dive into Mary's color theory. Are you suggesting that blue is a mixture of yellow and green?
It's the other way around. Whoops.
Yeah, that's not correct.
Color theory is not my strongest.
All right. Fucking call me out on using the word in the definition, but then try to pull that shit on me.
Paul, whose side were you on? Who were you saying?
I am on your side about using the word in the definition.
Okay, then give me a better definition that doesn't have a clearly negative bend.
Well, you know what? Most of the definitions, actually all of the definitions, have a negative bend because that's the overwhelming results of the research over much time. Only recently, in the last few years, has research in the psychological literature on perfectionism actually even considered the positives, what might be positives. So
you're suggesting that the answer is self-evident, like, or at least we assumed it to be self-evident?
I do think that the majority of the time, perfectionism does lead to negative outcomes. I think in the majority of cases. Now, there are some cases where people benefit from their perfectionistic tendencies when used in moderation. That's where I'm at on that.
But that's true of everything, though. You know, like, if you stay in the shop for 18 hours a day and forget to eat, like, you're going to be dead in a couple of months. You know?
Okay, that doesn't mean it's not valid because it applies to other situations.
All right, fine.
Okay, so one more interesting thing about perfectionism, like the root cause of perfectionism. So it's often caused from a combination of either genetic predispositions, so you can be wired for it, or environmental factors, Mary, such as childhood experiences with excessive criticism, Mary, or
I had to say my name twice there.
I don't know why I keep saying your name, or inherent personality traits that have developed throughout your life, such as anxiety due to trauma. Like, there's a lot of different reasons one can feel these perfectionistic tendencies. Now, Mary, you thought that that some of this was obvious, like that it was obvious that there were negative outcomes associated with it. Eric, you begged the question, is it that obvious? Might there be positive? So before we get into perfectionism in your work and art, which we're going to handle at length, we're going to talk about perfectionism at the start of a project, the middle of a project, the end of the project, selling your project. Like, we're going to get into all that. But right from the start, can you explain to me why you thought it was self-evident about perfectionism? And Eric, maybe you could share why you think it could be positive.
Are we bringing back the debate club already?
Wibb's Debate Club.
We don't have time for a debate club. We got too much to get through.
Wibb's Debate Club.
I mean, so in terms of the positive, it's in the name, right? You're like striving to make yourself better, to get to that level of perfection that you set for yourself. So that's why I thought it was obvious that, like, of course, it means that you're pushing yourself. You're kind of not setting like a bar where you're like, okay, like, this is good enough, whatever. But again, obviously the negative side comes into play, and there's too much of that. It becomes self-crippling, and it can cause stress, anxiety, procrastination, etc. So that's why I thought it was obvious. Maybe there are other hidden agendas.
And Eric, you thought there were points that were not so obvious about this. What did you mean?
Well, so in my opinion, or in my approach, I should say, I would say that perfectionism helps me to attempt to be better every time, right? And I think we can all agree that that's often a net positive. And as I was like, so to your point earlier, you said that a lot of people responded to the questions we put out on social media, and a lot of people did. And the overwhelming response that I got, like 90+% were negative experiences with perfectionism, about how it cripples people from finishing a project or even starting a project sometimes.
Right.
And I think like this can be applied outside of furniture or woodworking in like, there are people who have so much anxiety about planning the perfect vacation that they get overwhelmed by it. And then sometimes they don't even go on that vacation. And yet I would also argue that like perfection can come at times. The world is not a perfect place. We know the world is not a perfect place. And I'm not claiming that the world can be a perfect place. I don't think it ever will be. However, like your experience of a moment can be perfect. I think we've all had like in Paul, I would ask you if you've ever had a perfect day, right?
That's such a great question, because it gets into the idea of how do you define perfect?
It's the acceptance. It's a key component of it, because all of the components are not necessarily going to be perfect. But when it comes together as the whole, you look back on it and you go, shit, that was a perfect fucking day.
I want to tell you, yes, I want to tell you a saying I heard that relates to what you just said about thinking your day is perfect. And this saying, like so many sayings in one ear at the other, right? All these adages and idioms, right? But this one stuck with me because I think it was true, and I didn't realize it was true until it became true in my own life. And that was, happiness is not getting what you want. It's learning to want, appreciate what you already have. And that is like redefining perfectionism. If you see your life and if you stop wanting all the time and you start to appreciate and have gratitude for what you have, suddenly what was imperfect seems way more perfect. And the gratitude skyrockets. Yes, the gratitude shifts and your happiness, your personal happiness shifts. That was huge for me because I was always looking down the road for something or outside myself. And I've been able to switch that over the last 5 to 8 years. And that has made a huge difference. So to your point, have you had a perfect day? I think it depends on how you define perfect.
Well, and there's a reason I asked you if you've had a perfect day and I didn't ask Mary, because I knew you would have different answers to that question. But Mary, I'll ask you this. Have you had a perfect moment?
Moment?
Has there been a moment, and I'm gonna guess moments in your life where looking back on it, you were like, that was a perfect moment. Like all of the stars aligned, everything happened, and it just was the apex of that experience.
Yeah, I'm sure I have. I'm trying to think of like specific examples to come to mind.
We don't need specific examples.
But yeah,
life is life.
Yes, I can definitely say that there have been days when like this is just like, I don't know if I'd call it perfect, but like this was an amazing day. Like this was just so good. This was so like.
So let's if you don't want to put perfect on it, if you don't want to put perfect on it, let's call it amazing then. Like that is as near to perfect as one can achieve without it being perfect.
It's highly correlated to my happiness too. It's like I was so happy this day.
Sure. And I think that's a huge component of it. Now
that redefines your perspective.
We have all made objects where in a moment, as a thing is we hit that flow state, like something goes right, it comes together. Maybe it's the first thing you've ever made where like you look back on it and you're like, of course it's not perfect. But in that moment, it was perfect because it was the first time I had ever cut dovetails right and it came out just right. Or like you put finish on a project, or you deliver a project to a client and they're just elated, they're ecstatic. It is a perfect moment. And I don't think that you can separate that from the experience of being a woodworker and say like, well, the piece isn't perfect. Like that moment was perfect. And that tells the story of the piece. And I think with time and experience and the number of objects that you make, you can look back on some of those objects and you go, oh, that was perfect in its definition of perfection.
I do have a moment that I remember. The top one that comes to mind is like when I was I was like floundering for so long during my master's thesis of like, what is my final like ultimate project going to be? And I was trying to like mess up all these machines, and I like basically fucked up the 3D printer. And then the end result, I was like, oh, look how amazing this is. I like fucked up a 3D printer and like just made it do all these crazy things. And then I was like so many failures, obviously. And then this one thing came out that was so cool. And I immediately like took it, ran around to everyone being like, look at this thing that I just made. And like ran to my professor across the campus. And I remember just like being so elated. It's like, yes, this is it.
And I think part of the reason that stands out in your brain is because it was unique, right? It was one of one. If that happened every day, you would expect it. And it would be like every meal you ever have isn't the best meal you've ever had. Like that's not how the reason they stand out is because it was special in some way. And I think where perfectionism starts to become a negative thing is when you assume and expect that it will happen every time. And if like part of my journey is accepting that the thing isn't going to be perfect, and then when it happens to be perfect, like it's I don't even know, like it transcends the human experience somehow. It's other than. And I think that's the value of perfectionism, is it's not seeking that, assuming that it will be that every time and expecting that you can achieve that every time, but it's allowing the space for that special thing to occur. And if you shut that down, then you never get the opportunity to experience that.
Wow, Eric, that is a very I'm going to have to think about that for a while, honestly. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think Eric just won to debate club.
Well, the in full disclosure, like the theological underpinnings of where that idea comes from is like, you know, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church have this idea of like every person is completely imperfect, riddled with sin, yada, yada, yada. And we don't have to get too deep into it. But in the Orthodox Church, there's this belief of like, you can achieve perfection and it might not be a thing that lasts forever. You may be perfect in a moment or for a period of time. And just because you've sinned before then doesn't mean that you can't transcend that in a moment. And I think that taking that concept and applying it to our creative practice that's how I approach perfectionism.
That's what you just said, basically, to Mary. That's very interesting. All right. So, Eric, thank you. I'm going to re-listen to that multiple times and think it through, because I don't think I grasped the full weight of it in the moment. Just hearing it the first time, I will re-listen to it. And often, I hate to admit this, but so many times, Eric, shit you say in the moment, I'm like, yeah, that's good, gloss over it. And then I listen to the podcast again. I'm like, fuck, that was even better than I realized in the moment.
Sorry, buddy. I love you too, man. It's fine.
You do good. You bastard. Okay. So if I can summarize. So now we're going to get into the creative process, but before, I'd like to summarize sort of where we are. So obviously perfectionism can be tied to a fear of failure, right? It can be tied to procrastination because the goal is excessively grandiose and we need like ultimate preparation before we even start, in terms of huge swaths of free time or huge like skill sets before we even want to try, because we can see the goal up on that mountain and it seems too much. So procrastination comes in. These are the negatives. A laser-like focus during the execution and on results instead of sort of big picture about personal happiness or relationships or multitasking in the rest of your life while you're laser focused. And of course, a highly self-critical, being highly self-critical about the outcome, leading to a sense of low self-esteem at times. Now, those are some of the negatives. I think some of the positives are strong ambition to improve every time. Eric, I think you said that. Extreme perseverance. Keep trying. You know, I definitely relate to that one, man. You just keep putting your head down and put in the time and keep going. That's a positive. Huge jumps in quality each attempt. You know, sometimes when you try something, you know, you get these small iterative increases in quality or whatever. But I think perfectionists can have very large jumps all in one shot. And also a high standard of excellence. They just will not let products go that are shitty, right? So I think those are some positive attributes of perfectionism, as well as the negative. Now, let's bring it to the creative process. So I got so many responses that the only framework I could think of to organize them in a reasonable way is to say, all right, maybe we could talk about all of these questions in the form of like the start of a project, the execution and the middle of a project, and then the end, completing the project, but also then selling it, advertising it, and talking about it later. So there's 4 major book chapters I'd like to start with. So with regards to starting a project, here's one of the questions. What do you all do to overcome the mental paralysis or avoidance due to perfectionism at the start of a project?
In short, start with a skeleton. Don't flesh it out. Now, this is not advice. This is how I approach it. This is my perspective. I never flesh an idea out all the way before I start it, because 2 things. Number one, like, I know that I'm not good enough at illustration or CAD work to get it to a point where I think it's going to be perfect. And number 2, I need that freedom as I'm making a thing to make decisions on the fly. And that's what I think allows me to make interesting objects. And I can't do that beforehand. If I tried to do that beforehand, I would be paralyzed because it would never be perfect in a CAD program or on a piece of paper. So get a skeleton, get an armature, if you will, to which you can start adding material and play and give yourself space to make decisions in there. That's how I approach it.
But the skeleton, Eric, let me push back. Having a skeleton to a perfectionist is not enough. They don't feel ready with just a skeleton. That is not acceptable. You know what I'm saying? Mary, go ahead. You're smiling, Mary. I feel like you could speak to this. What do you think?
Yeah, mine's basically the opposite of what Eric said. Because I know I'm a perfectionist, and for me, the beginning is probably the most important part of the entire process, because I like to flesh things out to completion. Like, I like to go through hundreds of sketches. Once I hit the sketch that I think I like, the sketch is never like picture perfect either, but once I hit like some sort of scribble that I like, then I'll hone in on that, model it up. And then it is important to build in areas for play. However, I'm such like a type A, like I need to plan every sort of section and phase person, that I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is the area that I'm going to plan out where I can play, even if it's like a small thing, and then I can move on. It has to be like a list that I check off and like, I've done this now, I've done this now. So I really like things to be done at the beginning and designed fully. And Eric can attest to this, that is very crippling for me, in which I'll just like completely not build something for ages because I'm not happy with it. And I've said this in the past before, like I don't have the luxury of having a lot of time. So if I am building something, I want to know that I'm going to be happy with it in the end. And sometimes if I don't follow this process, then sometimes I'm not happy in the end. But you know.
So Mary, you are the most perfectionistic of the 3 of us, right? Self-proclaimed.
Not
right?
even close.
Okay. So the question was, though, and you didn't answer it, what do you do to overcome? What do you do to overcome that? You described the mental paralysis beautifully, and avoidance. But what do you do to overcome it?
Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just don't overcome it, and it's paralyzing. But other times, there's a few different routes that I can take. I look outward, so I ask for suggestions and advice from friends. I think that's really helpful in giving me a direction.
Yeah. Great answer.
That's probably my main go-to. Otherwise, my other one, if I'm like really just in a hole, I'm like, all right, fuck it. I'll just like start making something. Another one is, this is kind of related, but I like to make little models, like small models. And I think that seeing that in like 3D and being able to play with it, I think that helps hone in on a final design for me. But I think my main answer is probably going to be, I ask other people, friends, woodworkers, designers, etc.
Great. Okay. So that was our main question about starting a project. Now there's a lot of questions about during the execution phase or the middle of a project. So Eric, what if the project isn't turning out as good as good as you had hoped, are you losing enthusiasm along the way because it's not living up to your dreams and aspirations?
Oh yeah. No, that's a real problem. Like, it happens. And you, the listener, are not unique in that struggle, right? That is a real, like, I think all three of us, like, I know we've all had conversations where we're like halfway through the project and we're like, this fucking sucks. Like, I don't know what's going on and I don't even know what's wrong with it, right? I'm just like wading out into the fucking muck trying to be like, maybe this will work, and then you try it and it doesn't, and then you're more frustrated with it. So that is like, coming back to acceptance. I think, like, that's part of the process. And then to Mary's point about having conversations with people, like, that's when I turn to people. Larissa is around most often, so I turn to her most often. But I've talked to both of you guys about design ideas and needing, like, what do you think? What do you see? And you might see something that resonates with me, or you might say something that I entirely disagree with, and I can throw that out. And I think that's something that people early on in their creative journeys struggle to do, is like take feedback and then realize that feedback is useless to me. Doesn't mean you don't appreciate that person or their input, but for this particular instance, that's not valuable. So turning to other folks, having conversation, and learning to discern what's useful and what's not.
So I've had it happen to me where I'm doing something and it's certainly not turning out as good as I had hoped. I've had that many times. And I do what, Eric, what you said is I pause, I hit the pause button, and I talk to people, I reconsider, and I redesign until that sense of enthusiasm comes back about the failure. Like, I remember in a jewelry box, I was designing these little holders for earrings and rings, and I thought it would be cool, like kind of messy cobblestone carved, and it looked like a big pile of shit. And I was really upset. And I realized it needed more structure. That's all I know, is it needed more structure. It was too organic, too messy. And instead of losing enthusiasm throughout the project, I hit the pause button and I took a step back, and I was thinking, maybe instead of cobblestones, plant cells, like literally from like plants. Like, I started looking at electron micrographs of plant cells, which have a way more organized structure, but they still have a touch of organicness to the lines. And I used that, and I was reinvigorated. Like, it lit me on fire. It relit the fire that had kind of extinguished. So I do think, as you said, Eric, talking to people or redesigning, hitting the pause button, redesigning can help your enthusiasm along the way. All right, next question. Often I find myself not wanting to do the next step in a project because I knew it wasn't going to come out as good as I had planned, or I was scared it wasn't going to go well because it was on uncharted territory for me. I hadn't done it 100 times before. How do I get past that procrastination of wanting to start the next step? Mary, you're on the hot seat.
That's a good question. How are you going to finish your project then? Because for me, that's the whole motivation. I want to get to the end. I want to see the final product.
Well, what if Mary, you come into a step where the next step is something really I don't know what I'm doing, and it's got to be perfect. What do you do?
I would do test pieces. If it's like a technique that I don't know, then I would absolutely do test pieces. And,
absolutely.
See if it works, and you don't mess up your actual piece. And if it doesn't work, and you can learn from your mistakes, the more test pieces you do, the better you're going to get at it.
Okay, great answer. Okay, next. Are there certain parts of projects that require more perfection than others? For example, should certain parts of a project be more perfect? Do you tolerate imperfections in certain places more than others? For example, joinery with big gaps does not look good. But at the same time, I use wood that has literal fucking holes in it because it's burl, and I don't fill them with epoxy. I think the holes are beautiful, and there's chip out on my corners sometimes. Like, literally the corner of a box, like the top edge has a gigantic chunk missing. And you know what? I fucking love it, and I leave it. But if you see a gap in a miter or a joinery or finish, like where is imperfection? Where's perfection required, and where is it not, and why?
Well, I want to point out, first of all, that the imperfections that you were leaning on and embracing are material and organic imperfections and not your own, right? And that's a very
good.
key differentiation.
Very good.
But I think even so in short, I think if we're going to put a hard definition on it, perfection, the aim for perfection lies within the craft, like the skill set of the craftsperson, right? So your joinery, the execution, maybe your design, if design is your craft. But I think there's also tolerance within that. So, for example, we've all cut dovetails.
Yep.
Every one of you fuckers who've cut dovetails knows that the interior corners of your dovetails don't fucking matter because nobody gives a shit and nobody's ever going to see them. That's how it works, right? Sure, a gappy joint looks terrible. You know, where nobody's ever going to see a gap? Inside a mortise and tenon. That's how it works.
How about on the half-blind dovetails on the inside of the drawer, the overcut?
Yeah, nobody gives a shit.
I love when I see it. When I see that on period furniture, I get turned on.
And it's another wet dream.
Mary gets turned on by definitions, and I get turned on by kerf overcuts and dovetails.
We all have our kinks, you know? But there are people who see that and they want that because that tells them that it was made by hand and not machined out, right? So imperfections doesn't necessarily mean that the thing isn't perfect. And there is room within an individual piece or just even an individual joint. Like a joinery surface, right? The bottom of a dado is not going to be as clean as the show surface of a piece. That's how it works. Old time cabinets, turn one of those fucking armoires around and look at the back of that cabinet. That thing is straight off the scrub plane or off the pit saw. Like they're just beat to hell because it didn't matter. Nobody's ever going to see it.
I love seeing the scrub mark planes on the bottom of my Windsor chairs and my high chest. I left them because I think they tell the story of the human who made it. And when I see them, I think about their hands literally grabbing a scrub plane and going along the length. Like I can picture it because I saw the marks.
So then that asks the question, like, where does your definition of perfection fall, right? So is it the object in itself has to be technically perfect as though it was CNC'd? No. Or does the composition as a whole, including the maker, create perfection?
Humans are perfectly imperfect, and I'm all about seeing the human element. So actually, Mary, that's funny. Let's include you. So I gave an example of a hand carving on a previous post on Instagram. I carved something by hand, and I carved something by CNC. And I asked, would you pay more for the hand done one? The hand carved version had imperfections in it because, well, it's done by hand. And the CNC was literally perfect. And I said, would you pay more? And most people said, yeah, I'd pay more for the hand done one because it's the hand of the maker. I want to see that. But Mary, you said the opposite. You're like, I like the perfect one.
Yeah, it's not like I didn't like the hand carved one. I think I liked the CNC one because when I looked at the design, I thought that the cleanliness of the CNC cuts it balanced out the design that you had carved into it. But design is subjective, so I understand why people said that. Yeah. But personal preference.
I love that answer. I do. I love that answer. All right, next question. By the way, that last question was contributed by my good friend David Duyard. David, I love you. Next question. If you know you can do a better job on something, should you redo it and start over, or use that lesson to do better in the next project?
No. Well, all right. Well, hold on. Time out, because there's a major caveat here. If it is a commission or if it is a piece for a client that you are then going to take to them, there is the consideration like business ethics, right? Like if they are paying you to make a high wage to make the best possible object, I have started over under those circumstances because the thing is not right and the client is paying me a wage to the point where they deserve it to be right. So that's one consideration. Outside of that, then no, you should never start over just because it's wrong. Because sometimes when you get something wrong and it forces you down another path, you discover something really interesting and it can elevate the piece beyond what you thought it was going to be. If there is space to play in there.
So it depends. It depends whether it's your own piece or there's money attached with the expectations of a customer.
Yeah, if it's a speculation piece, then
you have to draw the line, I suppose. And so that brings us, we're going to put a pause. Now we've handled like starting the project, some questions about the middle of the project, but we're going to put a pause here before we start about how do you finish projects, right? The pause is for the overwhelming most asked question of every single person. So this question was asked more than any across all the responses I got. And Eric, you had 50 or 60, and I had probably 30 or 40. All right, you ready? I think you probably know what it is. How do you tell if something is good enough? Where do you draw the line? How do you keep a healthy balance? Is there a reflex or feel you develop for knowing where the line is, where it's good enough, and not to go into the negative side of perfectionism, etc.?
God damn, that's a hard question.
It's a really hard question. It's something, I know we're in a woodworking world, but it's something that I encounter a lot in my day job too, as a UX designer, because I have to make compromises a lot of the time, either from like technical limitations or, we're under tight deadline, etc.
Mary,
so that's something.
Mary, this question is like everything. Whether you're cooking dinner for friends, like, is it good enough? You're like, I mean, it's literally, how do you know if it's good enough? It applies to so much of our lives.
I do think it is something, it's a learned experience, or it's something that you are able to develop and hone much better through experience and over time over a bunch of projects. Because of course, the first time you make something, you're going to want to be like, it's going to be perfect. And like, it's that amazing naivete that makes you, like a great new designer and a new craftsperson who's excited to explore the world. But I don't really have a good answer, to be honest. Like, I do think that there is some sort of a gut feeling for me. Like, I think that I am able to recognize when it's worth moving on. I don't know how to describe it, though. Like, I'm not as eloquent as Eric of, like, I just don't know. It's more of a gut feeling of, like, this isn't worth it, your time, and I think you're going to be happier moving on rather than agonizing over something, remaking something, and that happiness later. I don't know. I'm kind of like weighing the pros and cons of how I'm going to be feeling later about it. Is it going to be reaching that like full, like that final peak of happiness that we talked about?
What I've found over time that I cannot live with is if I hand a thing over to a client or attempt to sell a thing that I know I cheated myself on or cheated the client on because time, money, whatever it is. So if I'm making a decision to not do a thing or not to try to make it better because I don't feel like it, that's not a thing that I can live with. I feel like the client deserves my attention more than that. Or I deserve my attention more than that. Like, I love woodworking. I made the choice to do this thing for a living, and it is a major component of my life, and it deserves my attention. If, however, it's imperfect because I had a certain amount of time to do the thing, and I did my damnedest to make it perfect within that time period, and it's not, that's fine. I can live with that. So for me, I don't know how to answer this outside of, personal experience, but for me, I know it's done when I've done my damnedest to make it as good as I can. And if it's not, it doesn't even have to be perfect. If it's not good at the end of that, I can at least honestly say, like, I swung the stick. I didn't go down looking, I didn't take the K. I just fucking struck out. Like, that's how it works, Like, listen, listen, I'm sorry. I grew up playing sports. You never go down looking, okay? You swing the stick. If it's close, you swing the stick. And if you swing the stick, at least you can say to yourself, I tried to fucking hit the ball,
Okay.
Maybe I missed, but that's fine.
So
Right.
it's kind of like, can you live with it, basically?
Yeah, can I live with looking at that piece in the future, knowing that it's not perfect, but knowing that I genuinely attempt. And this is not me telling the client this. This is not me trying to convince other people of this. This is just me looking at an object and saying, like, can I live with the idea that this is the way it is, and I attempted to make it as good as I can. And if I did, if it's imperfect, look, you only have so many hours, you got to get a piece out the door because of a client, or you don't only have so many, weekends in the year from your day job to go make a piece. And your spouse is like, you've been working on that fucking dining table for 18 months. Maybe just put a goddamn coat of finish on it.
Yeah.
Is this just for a client though? Like, what if it's for yourself?
I think the same thing applies. Like, I make speculation pieces and I give myself a time limit. And the thing is like, I'm going to attempt to make the best piece that I can within that time limit. And then once I get to the end of that, like, it is what it is. Like, you have to cut and walk away from it at some point, and you can't let it haunt you. You have to learn from it.
So my answer is more like Mary's. In essence, like, well, actually, it's like both of yours. There's just a gut feeling when it's good enough. Where's the line? You just have a gut feeling. And that comes through repetition. Sorry, that's the answer.
Yeah.
If you only think of it like establishing an average of something. Like, we know that the average, you take the sum and divide by the number of observations, right? That's an average. So if you think about like what's good enough, that being the average, right? You need a lot of observations. Sometimes you exceed the average, sometimes you underdo the average, but you need a lot of data points, and you start to feel like, okay, that's good enough. That's kind of shitty. I'm not usually down there. And it's personal to you. Like, you have to do enough pieces to know where your line is. So I think people asking, I think a lot of the people asking, where's the line? How do you tell if it's good enough? I think we'll figure out their own answer in time and with repetition.
I think that's an excellent point, and that's a thing that we don't grant ourselves enough of in this time period. Is we all, like, I don't know if this is a social media thing, just like the contemporary pace of society, whatever it is, but we never grant ourselves the time to learn and be a novice at a thing. Like, the moment you're a novice woodworker, now you're telling people you're an intermediate woodworker. And the moment you're an intermediate woodworker, you're running a side hustle. Like, just fucking be bad for a minute. Just like make shit and kind of suck and learn from it. And like, over years, it took me, I've been making things since I was in 6th grade. Like, it took me till I was 30, 29 to make a piece where I was like, oh, that is kind of good.
Yeah. So Eric, part of that, I think, is because so many woodworkers are overachievers in their non-woodworking life. So they expect the same from their woodworking life, even though they're just getting into it. They expect huge advancements, huge gains. And they're saying, how can I like optimize every step? They're not giving themselves the luxury of time. But anyway, that's my answer. when I look at something and I know it's right, oh, what a feeling.
That's the sweetest feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. It feels so good. It gives you chills, right? You just know it's right. You know it in your gut.
Too. It's so rare.
But
you have to accept that. Yeah.
And when you look at something, like Keith and I did those whiskey cabinets and the doors sucked. We thought they were great. We put them on the cabinet and we hated them. You just know it. You see it and you fucking viscerally hate it. And there's no changing the narrative at that point. So anyway, you just know through repetition.
Can I ask a question that's maybe semi-related, but I'm curious, like how, because in those moments, and we've all had those moments, it's like, man, I fucking nailed that. Like how do you, because one of the things that maybe comes along with perfectionism is like that negative self-talk. Okay. So how do you give yourself that moment of recognizing that you achieved and accomplished well without feeling narcissistic or self-congratulatory?
Mary, you answer this.
Oh, I don't know. Man.
That was cool, Paul.
Because I don't feel that way. When I feel like excited,
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
I'm like lit on fire. I have chills. I'm dancing around. I'm so excited. So I don't have an answer for that, but I bet Mary.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't really like soak it in that way. It's just mostly me being like, I really gotta build this thing now. Like, I need to like get this done. I'm just like so excited to move on and like get to actual. Well, for me, that usually happens in the design phase. So,
but
like,
Mary,
but then when you build the thing, it's not like that.
You're depriving yourself. You're depriving yourself that moment of like euphoria that you fucking nailed it. Like that's what keeps us going.
I'll push back on that, Paul. And Mary, I'm going to speak for you, but I want you to actually tell me to fuck off if I'm not right. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that euphoria translates into momentum to actually build the thing.
Yes,
it does.
Yeah. So for me,
huge.
It's kind of like almost like planning for the euphoria moment towards the end. Like, I know that I'm gonna love this when it's done because I'm so excited about it now. It's only gonna keep building while I'm building it, and that like when I see it come together, that's also like when I experience that kind of feeling.
So the reason I asked this question is because I feel like a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism and negative self-talk are afraid to give themselves the credit to achieve, to do something right. But from what both you just said, and if I'm wrong, again, tell me to fuck off, but I would agree with this, and this is why I think this is what you're saying, maybe this is a bias, is when that happens, it's not like a pat on the back, like, look how amazing I am, I fucking crushed it. It's the elation that the thing exists, like it's other than the self. And that I think is an important distinction, because if the people who are so steeped in negative self-talk can't get beyond the idea of like, well, it's not good enough, and can let that go and be elated that the thing just happens to be in this world now, like that, maybe that's a way around that negative self-talk. Maybe.
Okay, that's one side of it. But the other side, Eric, is the feeling like I did it.
Yeah, no. Don't get me wrong. Congratulate yourself because you fucking crushed it.
It's not like I'm awesome or anything. It's not like I'm like, oh, pat myself on the back. But it's like I was riddled with concern and worry about how it would come out. Could I figure it out? Could I do this? Could I crack this nut? And you did it, and it feels so fucking good that you did it.
Yeah,
and then the next day, like that sustains me through the night. I feel so fantastic. I was able to pull it off because I didn't know if I'd be able to. Honestly, the next day I come in, I see that thing, and I'm like, wow, it exists. It exists. Yes.
I would also say like the like amount of euphoria, at least for me personally, is higher for how much I have struggled through previously to get to that point of,
Good,
like I've like waded through all these like problem areas and stressful moments of just like thinking I couldn't handle it. And when you actually get past that, and I think that's actually what is the most satisfying part for me, if like I've overcome this.
And we've touched on kind of chasing the dragon in the past, and that's a major component of like as you make more objects. But I would agree with that on the whole. I think to the question earlier about like attempting things that you've never done before and you're unsure if you could do it well, the unknowing, the not knowing, and attempting and succeeding, that's where the elation comes in for me. It's the doing of the thing that you're like, holy shit, I have no idea how I'm going to pull this off. And then you figure out how to do it and it works. That's where the elation comes in. So don't be afraid of the things that you don't know how to do, because not only are those the moments where you learn the most, but those are the moments where you look back on and you go like, holy shit, was that a leap forward?
Oh, it's so... I'm just getting excited just thinking about this
conversation. So am I.
Like, I want to go in the shop. Fuck the podcast. Let's hit stop. All right. So we're going to run long. I can tell you, right? 48 minutes, and we haven't even gotten to like finishing a project or whatever. So notice if you don't like long podcasts, fucking... well, deal with it. Because this is a great topic. Okay.
That's a t-shirt right there. If you don't like long podcasts, fucking, well.
Deal with it. All right. So that was the most common question. How do you draw the line? How's it good enough? I think we've done our best to address our 3 points of view. There might be others, but we've done our best. Back to the process. So starting a project, executing a project, finishing projects. Do you ever stall out completely and the project stays unfinished, or do you just brute force it?
I brute force it. I can't leave projects unfinished. It kills me to leave things unfinished. I know that's not always the case. Like I was talking to Sean about this, Sean Kirsch, because he loves to leave projects unfinished. Not all the time. But I think it's just a mental thing for me that I have to finish this before I can move on, even if I am sick of it. Or I'm always sick of it at that point, to be honest. I just want to see it done. So that's my
Eric?
take.
I would agree the majority of the time with that. Like almost always I finish a project. But there are times where I have an idea and I start down a road, and pretty early on I realize that it's not working, and then I just abandon course. And that's like, I think that's fine. Sometimes you just like have an idea and you're like, I want to see if it's going to work, and if it doesn't, cool. No harm, no foul. But if I get like 80 to 90% done with a project, like I'm not finishing it. Like, but at that point, maybe it's the sunk cost fallacy, but like, I'm not gonna just like slap a coat, even if it sucks. Like just throw some shellac on it in 20 minutes and call it a goddamn day.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that. It's again that kind of chasing the dragon can be dangerous because you're at a point in your project where you are maybe tired of it, or like that high is getting low, and you keep wanting to get back to that feeling of euphoria. So you start a new project. I think that's dangerous. At least for me, it is. Because I feel like I would just abandon all the work that I've done and that I was so proud of before, but just time has passed. So I think that's what makes it dangerous for me. Of like, oh, I need that drug again of like, intense happiness. So
it is a drug.
100%.
I swear it is. For me, I always finish projects, but Eric, like you, occasionally I can see it. This is a non-starter early on. And I rarely make it halfway because I would have seen it wasn't going to work earlier. So I rarely make it even to halfway and then abandon it. All right, next question. Have you ever caught yourself saying it's good enough in a project just to get it done?
Yep. Entirely about context, but yes.
Okay. Context. Eric, that's a great point. What are these contexts you refer to?
Well, they're different. Like, to put it in another way, there are different standards, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm making a piece of standalone furniture for a gallery, it has to hit one standard. Mm-hmm. If I'm making a piece for a client, it's probably around that same standard, in fairness. If I'm making a piece for myself, probably a different standard. Like there are times where it just has to be done. Like I need a thing. If I'm making shop furniture, that's a different standard. If I'm doing built-in furniture, like built-in cabinetry, that's a different standard. They're not necessarily quality standards, but they're like, what's an 1/8 inch gap in furniture? That's a fucking mile. In framing, that's the sheetrock guys will get it. Like, who gives a shit? So I think it's about understanding the context of where your work is going to live.
Eric, can I say again, fuck you. You're one of the few people who has worked across all these different mediums and can actually speak to like timber frame, like rough framing and drywall and like fine furniture. Like, so honestly, I've seen you operate at all these different scales, and that really does calibrate, in essence, like your idea of what's acceptable at each of these. And, you're one of the few people who actually I've seen operate at the full spectrum from rough carpentry all the way to the finest gallery furniture. So I think you're a good person to take that question.
I appreciate that, but I also think it's more intuitive than just the experience. Like, but listen, both of you guys have master's degrees. One of you guys has a PhD, right?
Doctor.
The look that he just gave me.
No, because I don't have a master's. You don't get a master's.
You don't
degree.
have a master's?
You
just went from bachelor's to PhD?
Yeah, that's how it goes.
That's to show you how ignorant I am. My point is this: like, you both know how to talk to groups that are highly educated. If you walked into a 3rd grade classroom and had to explain what you did, you wouldn't dive into the details. You would speak at a different level, right?
True.
And I think that's the kind of context you need to have when you're approaching your work is, where is this going to live? who's going to be critical of this piece. And, like if it's a built-in cabinet and it's going to live inside a wall for the next 40 years, like nobody's going to see the back of this plywood. So it doesn't fucking matter. I don't need to veneer it with like curly babinga.
And speaking of which, all the furniture you love in your modern, Museum of Fine Art and whatever, all the non-show surfaces were treated like non-show surfaces.
Yep.
They are not perfect by any means. That is a more modern invention where it's perfect on every surface to implicate how serious of a craftsperson you are. Oh, I'm super serious. Everything's going to be perfect, even on the inside, even on the parts no one sees. Now, that's fine if that's how you want to spend your time. But historically, people were just trying to make a living for their family. They're not going to spend time on non-show surfaces. Okay, finally, what about, this is the last part about the process. So you finished it. We talked about, I think most of us brute force it or abandoned it early was our answer. The final question is, what about selling or promoting or showing the project? Does perfectionism, Mary, how about you take this one? Does perfectionism impact your wanting to tell people about the projects you've made?
Can you rephrase that question? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, if you feel as though it's not perfect, your perfectionism's like, it's not quite right. I don't, this is wrong and that's wrong and this didn't work out. Does that impact your wanting to tell people about the project, to feature it on your social media, or to sell it?
Okay, so if I'm doing a commission, I would not tell them because normally, if it's commission, then I will have put in the work to make it to the standard in which I set for myself. Yeah. I think that people really like seeing mistakes on social media. That's why everyone was always like posting those videos of here's where I messed up, and everyone always comments, "Oh, I really appreciated you posting your mistakes," etc., whatever. So people really like that. I don't do that per se because I don't care to.
Why? Why?
I don't know, really. I mean, I think that there's just like I only like to present finished things, which I know is not a good thing for social media, but for my own personal standard, I guess.
Does that say
it
something
absolutely
about?
Says something. Oh yeah, it absolutely says something about me. Like I want to see myself in that light, and that's why I don't post that much. Well, in general, I don't post that much, but yeah, absolutely. I think that says something about who I am and how I want to be seen, both from outside perspective and from my own perspective.
Mary, I'm not singling you out. I think all of us are like that.
We all know this.
No. But no, seriously, all of us are like that. We want to show our finest edge. We want to show our best pieces. So I'm not singling you out. Definitely.
I think I'm okay saying this because I have such an awareness of how I am not perfect and just like so much intense internal struggle of it not being good enough. And I think that keeps me in check.
Go ahead, Eric.
I'll say two things. Number one, the most critical people of your work will always be woodworkers who deal with perfectionism and self-doubt. Always, every single time. Now, the model of doing like furniture shows or craft shows is dying out. It's not, as prevalent as it was even 10 years ago. But, the worst thing to see, and I did this early on too, because you want to learn. A lot of people have good intention in it, but the worst thing to see is when somebody walks up to your piece and they do the drop. They drop down, they squat down, and they start, and you're like, get the fuck out of my booth, guy. Like, what are you doing? It's the fucking worst. But to give you a story about an imperfect object and how it played out in front of a real customer. I was doing a furniture show, I don't know, 2014 maybe. This was kind of right after I got out of school, and I was starting to design my own objects because I didn't have teachers around, and I was terrible at design. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So I made a maple nightstand, and it was so ugly. Like it just, I had no idea there was like stringing in it, but like the top was relieved in a weird way. And as I was making this, there was a drawer in the front, and I mortised the legs, and I accidentally mortised the interior portion of the legs where the drawer was going to be. And so I thought, okay, how am I going to fix this? I wasn't going to patch it with maple because you're going to see that glue seam and it's going to look like a mistake. And I happen to have some purple heart lying around because, of course, when you're, like a second year woodworker, you like just buy purple heart for no fucking reason.
I was going to say.
Yeah. No, there was that. I bought it like Woodcraft and you just fucking have it.
Of course.
So what I did was I filled the mortise hole with purple heart. And so I have this piece at this show. And this old guy comes over and he does the squat and he's looking at the table and he takes the drawer out and he sees these 2 purple heart fills inside, and he pauses and he turns over his shoulder and he goes, "Hey honey, come here, come look at this." And he just points at it and he goes, "You see this? This is true craftsmanship. Nobody would ever see this."
No.
But he inlaid the interior of these legs. That's a craftsman. And he had no idea that I fucked it up. So like that's what to him, that piece was perfect,
Great story. Eric, I have something similar. So I was cutting the top off a really high-end cannabis box, okay? And I'm ready to saw the top off, right? I put it on against the fence wrong. Instead of the bottom, instead of the bottom against the fence to cut the top off at a certain distance, I put the top against the fence. And I went halfway through the cut, and I'm like, now what, motherfucker?
Oh. That's the worst when you go halfway through a cut and you realize.
Okay. And I'm like, now what?
I feel that knot in my stomach right now.
Oh, I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to barf. Okay. And I sat there. I didn't freak out. I didn't throw anything. I'm not that kind of guy. I just put my hand on my chinny chin chin.
It's always
and whiskers.
And I thought, what can I do? And I decided to make that cut and inlaid a brass element with some like ebony accents all the way around the box. And it looked fucking mint after I was done. But like these things happen. You make errors and you like pivot into design elements, or you try to find clever, like mistakes are gonna happen no matter who you are, how many years of experience. Can you pivot and can you recover?
And so to the question at hand is, when you sold that box, it was a commission,
It was a cannabis box commission,
Yeah. So did you tell the client that you fucked up, or did you just say like, this was a design choice I made?
He was a really close friend of mine and a very good woodworker named Sam. And so I told him.
Yeah.
And he loved it because I knew he'd love it because he would understand the moment.
Yes.
I was like, Sam, I put it on the table saw backwards. And then I thought, wow, that looks really good. He's like, oh man, this is fucking the best. I love it. It looks even better. And he's right. Yeah. It did. It actually added to the piece. And I wouldn't have done that had I not made a mistake. So, every mistake, by the way, I had another one of those today. Oh my God, I just realized I have powder post beetles and a bunch of my wood out back. They're chewing holes in all my curly maple.
No.
Oh yeah. I have 2 gigantic slabs, like 3 feet wide, 12 feet long, 2 or 3 inches thick of curly maple through the whole, like curly through the whole slab, right?
Is there any other wood around there?
Yeah, there is, but they don't seem to want it. They only want the maple. They didn't touch the walnut. They didn't touch the oak, whatever. Okay, so I just realized that today. There's holes all through it. My wife comes out to the shop. She sees me upset, and she goes, hey, maybe you could make that a design element. And I'm like, you are fucking awesome. Best wife ever. She goes, why don't you fill that with, like, copper epoxy? Like, put copper in the holes. And the, like, little copper polka dots and the otherwise, like, chatoyant grain. And she's right. Like, I'm going to try to pivot this massive problem into a design element because it doesn't have to be a problem.
Well, so that's That's a really excellent example of like taking the path that's in front of you. But and even when you sell that to a client, you like that's a good story. But there's again a key differentiation there to be made between like you didn't make that mistake. That was a thing that happened in nature, so you can sell that story. But when you fuck it up,
That's a good point.
how then are you going to tell that? Like, is it a thing that's okay to say? Because the thing that is universal in woodworking, we've all done it, and we do it more when we're younger in the journey, less as we grow. But we always people, oh, that's a lovely piece. Yeah, but I fucked this up. Everybody does it.
All right,
Everybody does it.
Wait, Eric, put a pin in that. That's one of my questions for the lightning round, which is next.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
I'll ask that question in the lightning round. Okay.
Okay.
All right. The last part we have before we could pivot to the lightning round is Mary, why don't you take this question about selling or promoting? Does the object being, say, perfect or imperfect, let's say you didn't have a price yet. It wasn't a commission. Does its perfection, the level of perfection, does that change its price?
Yes, because in my mind, the level of perfection is directly tied to the design of the piece. It's not like the finish or the craftsmanship, which also has a standard. But for me,
That's
it's more related to the design of the actual piece.
Okay, so perfectionism to you is in the design.
Yeah.
Not as much the execution. I know I'm not saying you don't care about the execution. I know you have a high level, but to you, design is really the crux.
Yes.
And I think Eric, I think you and I, a lot of woodworkers, the execution, the tight joints, the perfect finish, right?
That's sure. Well, right? That's interesting to me because, like, I know your education is in design, and my education is in craft. Yeah. So it's interesting exactly. that we have like those opposite value scales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it makes sense. I mean, that's where you kind of consider your self-worth almost.
Sure. I don't know that the closer to perfect a thing is, whether that determines its price point. Like I usually set the price point before I make the object, and then I just try to make it as perfect as I can. But if I fuck it up severely, then maybe it'll have a negative impact on the price point.
All right. So that I feel like we've
Wait, Paul, you didn't answer.
About does it change the price point?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not much. I have an idea of a price point from the early stages, and whether the finish is perfect and the joints are perfect or just slightly imperfect, like that doesn't really shift it. I think, Mary, it's more about the function, the piece itself as a whole. These tiny little details that we stress over about perfection don't really change the price point for me. It is what it is, and I do my best on every piece. Yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so I think we have touched on starting projects, executing projects, finishing projects, and selling projects, right? What I would like to end on before we go to a lightning round, because there's a few questions we got that don't fit in any of those bins, is what is your, like, if you could summarize, if you could give 1 to 2 sentences, like, to the listeners, like, how do you think about perfectionism? How do you navigate it? How do you control it from controlling you? What summary would you give to the listeners?
God damn, that's a hard question.
Those are a lot of questions to put into 1 or 2 sentences.
Can you define perfection? No.
Oh my goodness.
I'll go first while you can think.
All right. Okay.
For me personally, perfectionism has not become a hindrance because I'm not wired like that. I'm not a perfectionistic person. Okay. So for me, perfectionism has turned up the volume on my trying to be better, trying to get things better, more the positives. And when I find it crosses that line into negativity, I can recognize it and I can dial it back and say, you know what? Humans are imperfect and we're still beautiful. And so is furniture that has these quote unquote imperfections. Cut it out and just make a thing and make people happy. I can just tell when I'm doing it, and I just throttle myself back. So I know that's kind of a cop out. That's not like a great solution for people who think perfectionistically, but I'm not one of those people. So I'm not really qualified to offer you a solution.
Yeah, my answer is kind of, I mean, it's a little bit the opposite, of which I am more naturally a perfectionist. So for me, it's very much, and I use perfectionism as a way to set goals and standards for myself, but I would say that the majority of the time, it's always just keeping myself in check and constantly reminding myself about that line of perfectionism and is it worth the stress and fatigue and procrastination that you're putting yourself through. So yeah, for me, I do the opposite. I kind of have to always be checking myself and making sure that it's not, the negative side is not hindering me.
So you basically keep tabs on yourself. You check yourself regularly
Mhm.
to make sure you haven't crossed the line into negativity.
Yeah, I like it's a question I have to ask myself. Like, is this worth it? Like, are
Okay.
you feel? Because
Okay.
like, also it's like a mental thing too. I'll find myself spiraling and like getting
Mary,
into these like mental
Mary,
stressful
the fact
states.
that you're self-insightful and self-aware enough to see when you cross the line into what might be negative is a huge accomplishment. All of us grow in our self-insight and self-actualization, right? As we are in our 20s and 30s and 40s. Some of us in our 40s, Mary. Us older folks. So I think that's great.
Paul, can you repeat the question just because I want to make sure I answer the actual question?
Yes. What, like, if you were to offer the listeners a solution or something they could do to help themselves cope with their perfectionistic tendencies,
Okay.
like, what would it be?
Okay. So, as I was sitting with that, I want to point out that when I was younger, I struggled with performance anxiety a lot, right? Like I played sports growing up. I was in the, music all my life, theater to an extent. And I was always terrified of getting it wrong, like severely terrified of getting it wrong. I remember I was a running back, I was a cornerback, and I always, before every snap, I always was mentally walking through the play for fear that I was going to fuck the play up. So fuck you with your performance enhancers in the group chat out here, trying to make a goddamn point. And I think that is similar to people in the woodworking space. In music, like I thought music was perfect. It sounded like the recording of the song until you start going to concerts and hearing live music and realizing that it sounds nothing like the record. Because the record is sterile. The record is an idea and it's highly produced. But the music that's being created in the moment is a little bit sloppy. Like there's the notes a little bit flat. The singer doesn't quite hit it quite right. The guitarist fucks up a lick. And I think similarly in the woodworking space, when you exist in a world where you are alone in your garage or your barn or your shop, wherever the fuck it is, and all you ever see are the things online that are highly curated and perfect, that's like never hearing live music. And the solution to me was to go be amongst art that is being created in the moment and seeing how fucking sloppy it is, because the overall composition might be perfect, but the details are just like something's a little like this one's just a little quite off to the left there, like that one's not quite right. And being around other woodworkers who are more experienced than you or going through the process simultaneously and seeing how they fuck it up and then find the resolution in that and get to the end of the song to get the audience to cheer at the end of the thing. Like that is the creative process.
All right. So Eric, you're basically saying increase or sort of grow your awareness and your perspective of what it's like out there with other people, with other makers, with other artists, and stop being so hard on yourself.
Yeah, I'm saying that when you assume that everybody else is perfect and you are the one who is different, it's impossible to overcome that. And once you get out and see other people's creative processes and realize that nobody is perfect, then that, at least in my experience, helps me to accept my imperfections, and that we're all just trying to make shit the best we can.
I love it. Thank you. Great answer. So obviously our longest episode ever again. I don't know how we keep doing this.
It's perfect, man. I don't know
You
what
long-witted motherfuckers. Okay, so we were going to do a lightning round because there's 15 questions we got that don't fit in any of these bins, and they're really good. Let's feature one or two, and we'll do the rest in the after show.
It's a lightning round. Let's do 3, and then we'll do
All right,
the other
let's do
12
three.
in the
All right,
after
fine.
show. All right.
We'll do a long episode, and we'll do the rest in the after show. If you want to hear the after show, all you have to do is give us some support on Patreon. All right, first question of the lightning round. And what lightning round? What we mean is not long fucking answers.
Not what I just did. Fucking
Okay.
keep it brief.
No, that was a summary. You're allowed to do that for a summary statement. A 10,000 foot summary. Yeah, that was good. Okay, are you ready? Lightning round. Give shorter answers. Ready?
Okay.
Why, when we build something and we show someone that thing, do we go straight to pointing out the motherfucking imperfections?
This motherfucker wants us to keep it brief and opens with a why question.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Why? Not yes
I
or
was
no.
gonna say like
why?
yes or no.
Yeah. It's because we are insecure in our knowledge of the craft, I think, and we therefore want to qualify the work that we've done rather than presenting it as a whole. We're more afraid of the people discovering the mistakes than we are of the mistakes themselves.
That's what I was gonna say. You want to acknowledge it first before they actually acknowledge it.
Yeah. And I think all three of us have gone through that phase, and
Absolutely.
we all learned, don't fucking do that.
Don't do it.
Stop. Whoever's listening to this, do not do that.
And if the person looking at the piece calls you out on a mistake, tell them to get the fuck out of your house.
The person receiving that piece, in their eyes, it's literally amazing.
Yeah.
Don't convince them otherwise.
Yep.
Okay?
That's a great way to phrase
I know
it.
there's imperfections in your eyes. To them, it is amazing. Let them have their moment with your amazing piece. Don't ruin it.
Ooh, don't make it about you. God damn,
Yeah.
that's a fuck. To them, it's amazing. Don't convince them otherwise. That's such a fucking good way to sum that up.
Let them have the moment with the piece. I mean,
Yeah.
Eric, you can, and Mary, like, I've seen people go to tears over a piece, literally cry, or have hands shaking over a piece. Don't fuck it up with your little perfectionist. Oh, this dovetail's a little off.
I know. We're supposed to keep this brief. I will make this the shortest story I've ever told on this podcast. I made the ugliest table that I've ever made in my life early on in my career.
Oh, yeah.
It was a reproduction of a Pottery Barn piece, and it was so fucking ugly. It was made of oak. She wanted it to look like this thing out of a catalog, which was whitewashed and reclaimed. So I beat it to shit with a scrub plane and chains and hammers. And I painted it white and sanded it back. And I was so nervous to give it to her because it was literally, to this day, the ugliest thing I've ever made in my life. And I wrapped it up and I delivered it. And I unwrapped it in her kitchen and she literally started crying. And I thought, holy shit, I fucked up bad. And she goes, this is perfect. And I was like, oh, you and I have very different definitions of perfect, man.
Like we said, design is subjective.
Yeah, let them have their moment.
Eric, have you seen modern art? Design is subjective. Okay. Second lightning round question. Good. You did pretty well. That was only a few minutes each.
Paul, you're the one who spent the
You took the longest.
Shit.
Don't give a shit.
Shit. It's true. Number 2, are deadlines a cure for perfectionism? Go.
No.
A cure? No.
No, not at all. You still, like, you're just going to be more anxious about fucking it up in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, I mean,
Alright.
there's like nuance to it in which they can help you just kind of get over it. But I don't think if we're doing blanket statements, no.
Okay, I agree with you. Okay, that was an easy one. Okay, the third one's a technical one. All right, I tried to mix it up from philosophical to technical. How smooth is smooth enough? Can you really tell the difference between 220 grit and 320 grit? How about 320 and 420? Will your client on a commission know the difference? Are you cheating the commission customer if you purposely don't go as high as you can?
First of all, so hard not to make a sex joke there. Secondly, if we're talking again about smoothness, it's about standards. In the cabinetry world, you never sand above 180. In the fine furniture world, you typically sand around 220. in the stone world, you go upwards of 1,000 to 2,000. So how smooth is smooth enough? It's entirely dependent on the material you're working in. And wood, typically, if you're applying a film building finish, some people say over 220 or 320. I would say like keep it to 220. It's fine. Like stop. It's fucking done. Just get it done.
Mary?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I finish mostly to like 180, 220.
Well, I finish everything to whatever the fuck I want because shellac's sitting on top of it, right? So
exactly.
I'm not, the surface you're touching is the shellac. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure, like the wood underneath, it does have an effect on the chatoyance, the level of chatoyance, because if it reflects light really well, you get high chatoyance. And if it's really abraded and scuffed, it does not. So you want to go at least to 220, 320 to get that nice chatoyance on figured woods. I'm speaking figured woods only. But after that, shellac's on top. And so I'll give you all a super secret tip. If you use shellac after your final coat and it's not quite buttery smooth and you're like, little nibs and whatever.
Wax a bitch.
No.
Or brown paper.
No. If you hit it with like 3,000 or 5,000 or 7,000 grit automotive sandpaper, it feels ridiculously glass smooth and it does not affect it does not affect the gloss at all. It just changes how your fingers feel because apparently your fingertips can detect like 1 nanometer.
10,000.
1 nanometer of distance. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So at the very end of project, if it's not quite smooth, I just hit with 5,000 grit sandpaper, just very by hand. And it's buttery smooth. So,
but that's a differentiation between the wood and the finish because finishing is a entirely different art. It's a black magic.
Correct.
So something to bear in mind for the wood itself. Listen, just as a general rule of thumb for somebody who's crippling within that question, 180 to 220, maybe 320 under some circumstances. That's all you need.
I agree completely. All right, there are 10 more of these perfectionism questions. Woo! That we're at an hour 20. Oh my God, you all.
We crushed it. Nailed it. I'm not even drunk. What are we doing?
It's a failure of an episode now.
Honestly, there it is. I need another beverage before we hit this after show.
Okay, we're going to handle the other 12 questions and some of them on I'll just give you an example of what we're going to answer in the after show. Do your views of perfectionism evolve over time?
Oh, that's a good one.
That is a good one. Yeah.
All right, we're going to end it there.
All right. Well, if you want to tune into the after show, just join our Patreon and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone. We hope this episode was super interesting and applicable. Mary?
Yeah. Also, if you have questions like these and you want us to answer them, please submit them to the Patreon or Instagram.
Yeah.
All right.
The Instagram page.
I think we'll ask more in upcoming shows about what things you're thinking about because that led to an excellent episode.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the after show.
Make good decisions.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.